Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Oklahoma Venture Forum podcast. I am your host, Kyle Golding. I am here today with Charles Thuo, founder and CEO of Apexloads. And Apexloads is a cloud-based freight marketplace that connects cargo owners with transporters to streamline the freight truck matching process and facilitate faster payments. This is an interesting business model, an interesting entrepreneur. Can't wait to hear all about it. So, Charles, introduce yourself, give us a little bit of your background, and then talk about Apexloads, how you come up with it, what it actually does, and where you are in the process of getting this business out into the world.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kyle. Thank you for this amazing opportunity. So I'm Charles. I don't know how much time we have, but I can go all day talking about logistics. But who I am, so I was born and raised in Kenya. So basically what we're trying to do with Apexloads is adopt the solutions that we have here in the U.S. and implement them in a new market. Because comparing Africa and the U.S., they're at least a decade behind, which is fascinating because, hey, these solutions already exist. Why can't we just borrow it? And that's pretty much what we're doing with Apexloads. So I came here to the U.S. for school. That was a plan initially. I came on a student visa. I started OSU-OKC. I did engineering there. I got an associate. When I signed up in the Army, that's how I got my citizenship. And then I came back.
Thank you for your service. I want to make sure to say that.
Thank you. I came back, went to OU, where I did a bachelor's in aerospace.
Okay, so you got the cowboy side and the Sooner side covered.
So it's always fascinating whenever watching the games.
Right. Who do you cheer for?
Yeah, so it's always interesting, but I love them both.
All right, there you go. So, good answer.
So after school, I worked in the industry for a couple of years. I started out at Cessna in Wichita, and then I moved back to Boeing in Midway City because my wife didn't want to move to Kansas. So
that makes sense. But those are two big names anyone would recognize from aerospace, right?
Yeah. So I mean, Boeing is one of the greatest companies in the world. So. Fascinating. So how I got into logistics? So it started as a side hustle,
like all great businesses do.
Right. So when I was at Boeing, I only worked 4 days a week. So I did the 10-40, just 10 hours a day, because I used to live in Hinton, so it was like an hour commute. So it was much better when I only worked 10 hours and I can only work 4 days. But since I already had a family, so I was a traditional student and. I mean, engineers are great, but entry level, it's not that great when you have a family, right? So I was trying to find a side hustle, something I can do over the weekend. And I knew logistics guys, there's a lot of potential there. So I took my 2 weeks vacation and went and got a CDL. So
okay. That's not the typical route to how these things get done, but that makes sense. Okay.
So usually the class is 6 weeks. But after the second week, they usually do a test every week. So I convinced the teachers that, hey, let me test. If I pass, I pass. If not, I'll just come back. But I couldn't go back because I only had 2 weeks. So I had to pass. But luckily, I passed. Good. But the next interesting thing was kind of like trying to find a part-time job. Because just because you have a CDL from a school doesn't really mean you know how to drive.
Right.
So
but this means you're capable of driving.
Yeah. I mean, you can park and you can basic stuff, but over the road, that's a whole different thing. So a lot of employers are comfortable hiring you part-time if you already have a full year of experience.
Okay.
Or you have to work full-time so they can take a couple weeks training you and all that kind of stuff. So after about like 4 months of trying get a job, because I mean I couldn't leave my day job then. So I just start my own company. So I started a trucking company here in Oklahoma. So we started Hot Shot. I don't know if you're familiar with Hot Shots.
No, I'm not.
So it's kind of like a 1-ton trucks with like a gooseneck trailer.
Okay.
And they carry small loads. You know.
Anything. So not the big big rigs, but
not the semis. But the setup, if you carry like 10,000 pounds or more, usually you would need a CDL, which I already had. So it was an easy transition. And also consumer loans are different from commercial loans.
Sure.
So you're not gonna get your truck your first time is a whatever. So a one ton is really easy to get because you can say it's a personal vehicle, and then
the bank understands that purchase a lot better than a big rig, right?
Yeah. So I got the truck and started hiring drivers. So I had a driver drive for us, and it's a little tricky dealing with drivers because if you're doing over the road, you don't get to be home every day.
Oh, right.
So a lot of guys don't handle that. So I think we went through there was this one time I went through 4 drivers in 6 months.
Oh.
So it's a little tricky. But by then I had seen the potential because it got to a point where I was paying my driver more than I was making in my day job.
Okay, there it is. There, how do you get out of the day job? Yeah. There you go.
And I was like, hey, wait a minute, why am I stressing over this? Because I had a driver that would literally pop a tire every week.
Oh. So
I'll be getting calls and hey, I got a tire, and I'm like, why am I dealing with this? I have the CDL, I can just do it myself.
Right.
So 2020 in April of all years.
Right.
So that's when I decided to do the switch. But it had kind of got to a point where I said, this makes sense. I just had to convince my wife and say, hey, I'm going to be a truck driver now. And but I've never looked back, and I was like, if I can make it in 2020, I can make it any other year.
That's for sure.
So that's how pretty much the idea of Apexloads started. I have friends and family who do logistics back home. I have 2 cousins in logistics, so we compare notes. So I'll be like, hey, how do you guys do this? And when I learned how it works over there, it's like, hey, wait a minute. So you don't have a load board? How do you guys connect to it? So that's kind of like, okay, this is something we can do. I use load boards every day. So let's say, for instance, actually this afternoon, I'm picking up a load here in Oklahoma City going to Santa Ana in California, and the broker is in Minnesota. So you can put in perspective. So I'm a transporter from Oklahoma picking up a load in Oklahoma, which is easy, but going to California. Right. But the broker is in Minnesota. So there's no way to do that without a load board.
Right.
I mean, after maybe 10 years, I may eventually meet a guy from Minnesota, but that's very unlikely.
Sure.
But with the load board, it helped us as kind of I'm an owner operator. We only have 1 truck. I do semis now, right? But the problem that you get being a small company or an owner operator is that shippers or direct companies are not going to give you a contract because you don't have the capacity.
Right.
So let's say, even if a shipper ships 3 loads a day, they can use you because you don't have 3 trucks. So if they give me a load going to California, I'm not used to them.
That's it, right? As long as it's on the way to California, that's all you can do.
I'm not used to them. Or even for me, it doesn't make sense for me getting contracts anyway, because even if I have shippers in OKC, I can only use them when I'm in OKC.
Right.
So that's why it makes sense to use load boards. So we looked at how, what would we need to build a load board? And I was kind of like, okay, this is a development problem. You just need a developer and to come develop the platform. And we started working on it. We started working on it in August of 2020. So I got linked to that developer. We had to outsource this because of cost,
Sure.
I remember getting a quote for a developer here in the U.S. and they were quoting $50,000 to build it, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's not gonna work. So
right.
We were with an outfit in Kampala called Kesha Concept, and we'll be working with them ever since. And the fascinating thing is kind of so how it became to be. The project was initially supposed to take 6 months, but.
Right. What is supposed to be what really happens is always a little different.
So
sure.
It's kind of I remember whenever we were going over the requirements, the initial requirements. Oh yeah, we can do this in 6 months, and then after 6 months, it's but we started understanding the complexity of it. Because you're dealing with distances like search radiuses. When I'm searching for a load, I want to search loads that are close to me. So you gotta incorporate Google API so you can be able to get that distance. And so there's some little complexity to it, and then you gotta worry about the back end of a transporter and the back end of a cargo owner. But it's really simple because these guys are feeding each other. If you're a cargo owner, you have the loads, and I'm looking for the loads.
Right.
So you post the loads, I search for the loads. And I have the truck, and you're looking for a truck. So I post my truck, and you can search for the truck. So it's really easy to mesh the two. So the platform, I'll call the platform was ready, kind of like what you would call an MVP.
Sure.
So we had like an MVP like November of last year, 2021. And, I didn't even know what an MVP was, because I don't have a background in startups and all that kind of stuff. So, okay, does it work?
You're just learning along the way, right?
So you're just learning along the way. So our primary market was going to be in Africa, because that's what we do, trying to adopt a solution and implement it over there, right? And whenever you look at Africa is divided into 4 regions. So you have a north, east, west, and south. So I'm from Kenya. Kenya is East Africa, so that was the obvious choice to start over there. And I don't know how familiar you are with East Africa, but there's 3 main countries: Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania.
Right.
So Uganda is landlocked. So if you think about like here in perspective, so it would be like Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. So Arkansas would be like Uganda.
Right.
So, but since a lot of these countries, it's all imports and exports. So all their imports and exports either have to go through Mombasa in Kenya or through Dar es Salaam in Tanzania.
That's where the ports are.
That's where the ports are.
Sure.
Yeah. But the interesting thing, so what ends up happening is that you would have a lot of trucks that go from Mombasa or Dar es Salaam going to deliver cargo in Kampala, their imports, but they can now find return hauls back to Mombasa. So
which makes it less efficient. For them.
It makes it, it actually makes it super expensive. Like right now, shipping in East Africa is like 50% higher.
Oh. Like
here in the U.S. right now, the rates are kind of shitty right now. It's kind of like anywhere from like $2 to $3. But in East Africa, they're getting paid $4. But a lot of that is due to the inefficiency. And since these guys know that they're not going to find a backhaul, so they usually charge a round trip.
You got to charge for the whole trip instead of just the one way.
Yeah, so 70% of these trucks are going back empty. But so the interesting thing is kind of like Uganda has a lot of exports. So they export a lot of beans, a lot of sugar, and also a lot of fish byproducts. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if you ever seen this on the highway. You see like a log truck going this way, and then you see another one going this way. I'm like, guys, just like buy from there. And so that's the issue that you're having. So whenever truckers go to Kampala, they can't connect with brokers because there's no platforms to connect. So they're stuck there for like 3 or 5 days. So that's why a lot of them just go back empty. And then, so you have the inverse. You have truckers that take exports from Kampala, which most of them are going to be transporters from Kampala, and then go to Mombasa, and they have an inverse problem finding a return load. But usually in Mombasa and Dar es Salaam, it's not as hard because it's a port, so it's a really busy port. But so what we're trying to do is kind of like, so whenever these guys go to Kampala, so we're trying to connect them with brokers in Kampala who are doing exports and say, hey, this trucker is already going that way. So it's cheaper.
It's cheaper.
First of all, it's cheaper more efficient, to do that. Yeah. So, and that's essentially how we started. But so we had our platform ready, and, we were ready get to the market, and then becomes the marketing piece, and I didn't know marketing was that expensive. So I remember getting the quote, and I'm like, hey, there's 2 extra zeros here.
Very. When there's 2 extra zeros, that's very expensive. Yes.
Yeah. So and that's kind of like, so we had to go back, say, hey, okay, where do we get the money? Because as a solo founder, I was kind of like bankrolling everything. And so whenever we started back to our step, okay, what is a startup? Okay, are we a startup? Okay, yeah, we're a startup. What do startups do? Then that's when we started learning about pitch decks. Like at the beginning of this year, I didn't even know what a pitch deck was. Right. So you had to Google what's a pitch deck and all that kind of stuff. And then that's when I started learning terms, which are trivial. Co-founders. I'm like, what is a co-founder? So a lot of that stuff we kind of like had to backtrack, and which was amazing. So in Oklahoma, we started with E3. So it's a program with I2E.
Right.
So, and that was kind of like that's always kind of like our starting point, because these guys, I mean, shout out to E3. They're pretty awesome. So they were able to ground us, like, hey, we know you're over there. You already have your MVP and you already have users, but you have to come back and kind of like redo your foundation. So gotta do the basics, because even whenever we were talking to customers, a lot of it was not documented. And they'll be like, okay, if you don't have the data, it's just an opinion.
Right.
You can't take your word for it. So, but it was interesting since, so whenever we had to go back, it's more like a confirmation, but getting all that, and which is really important. So we really appreciate that, like having us, go back, retrace the steps, building even a pitch deck, like knowing what investors care for.
Right. A formal business plan, things of that nature.
Formal business plan, and even knowing the language, like, because usually a lot of investors, it's really nice when you find an investor who knows about the industry you're in. So they understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, you can kind of skip over some of that education and go straight to the conversation, right?
Right, but unfortunately, some of them don't. They're just rich guys with money, which is great,
right?
But you have to understand the language, so you can because whenever I'm talking about my startup, I'm gonna talk about what I'm interested in, but that may not be what an investor is interested in.
Right.
Like I may be talking to okay, how does a transporter benefit, or how does a cargo owner benefit from using a platform? Right. But the investor may not really care about that. They want to care about, like, how do I make money?
Yeah, right. Where does the return on investment happen? Where does profitability come from?
Exactly. So we had to learn a lot about that. And then so we did a couple accelerators. We did another one called Helios. It's big on EOCIO, Web3s and all that kind of stuff. And then recently we just completed G Beta.
Right.
In Oklahoma City. That's how we were able to meet you. So shout out to Elizabeth at
there
G
you
Beta.
Go. Yeah.
That's really awesome. And we're learning and all that kind of stuff. And we actually found our first investor in Oklahoma, which was really amazing, because to us, that was like validation.
Right.
Like one important thing I learned from all this is kind of like it doesn't matter how much you love your product, you're not the customer.
True.
So you're not the customer. So whenever you find somebody else, like I would call it believers, like what I've learned. I mean, I had a lot to learn, so in the beginning, I never approached it the right way. I was approaching it, it's kind of like, this is the best idea ever out there,
Right. Like, I like it. Everyone's going to like it.
Everyone's going to love it. So, but you usually get reality checks and they're like, hey, okay, it's all right, but what about this? Or what about that? Competitors, like, okay, I hadn't thought about that.
Right.
But a lot of times it's kind of like you had the information, but you don't know how to present it.
Right.
So we also had to do that, getting critiques, like I think right now on our pitch day, we're like on the 11 iteration.
Right. Continue to get that input and make it better and better.
I look back and all this has happened like this year.
Right.
So it's kind of like a fire hose of information. But you can easily see the growth. Like I can appreciate the growth,
right.
At the beginning, it's kind of like, what do you even need accelerators anyway? To me, I would call them gatekeepers in the beginning, because they are essentially gatekeepers, because you really have to go through an accelerator to have access to the investors.
To the capital, right.
Yeah, to the capital. And I never really understood the point, but like going through, we've gone through 3 so far.
Right.
And they're relatively the same, but you always learn something.
Yeah.
So if there's founders out there, trying to get into an accelerator, it's not all about the money. You find startups that don't want to go through an accelerator because it's not either offering them a grant or whatever. But I'm like, hey, we can take all the help we can get.
Right.
mentors. Mentor has been really great.
Yeah, there's information, there's education, but there's connections and relationships
also,
too, right? Yeah,
exactly. Because one interesting thing about how we met our first investor is that like we didn't even know he was an investor. He was at a kickoff event for Generator. So we were just this guy at the bar. So it's kind of like it's a first night meeting. He was a previous he's a founder himself. So he's an alumni for Generator.
Right.
So he was at the event, and we were just talking and say, hey, who are you? You know, what do you do? And so it's kind of like going over what we're doing. And he was like, hey, I like your pitch. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I wasn't even pitching.
Right.
You know, if I knew you were an investor, I'd have been pitching. But he understood the market and the opportunity, and we actually made the deal that night. You know, we had to just finalize the paperwork and get it going. So it's been quite a journey. So right now, so the thing about marketplaces, you're doing matchmaking, right? So you have what we call the chicken and the egg problem,
right?
You know, so you go to a cargo owner, then they will ask, so do you have transporters? You know, and you go to sign up a transporter. So do you have cargo? So one way to do that, so we decided to make our platform free for this whole year. So you'll be free until the end of the year. And that was to encourage people to join in because, hey, man, you don't have anything to lose.
And ultimately prove the concept, right? And,
yes.
And get you from that MVP stage to a full functioning business that's been verified.
Yes. So, and I loved the reception. You know, like right now we have about 2,200 users signed up.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, which is amazing. So we've grew like 80% in the last 6 months whenever we did our onboarding. So I remember there's like this one time I was in Kampala and I was printing flyers. And it was that they have like little kiosks, you know, on shopping malls where you can go print flyers. And I was talking to the lady, you know, printing these flyers, you know, we're a logistics startup. And she was like, hey, I think there's a broker on that building that does logistics. I was like, oh, okay. So I literally went from printing flyers and went to the office and just knocked on the door and said, hey, I'm Charles with Apexloads and this is what we're doing. And I was able to sign them up.
Wow.
So, and that kind of like what gave me hope, you know, like it's because there were frustrating times, you know, like all
entrepreneurial journeys, there's definitely frustrating times.
It's kind of like, man, you know, is this really gonna work? You know, like there's always that at the back of your head, you know, even though I know, like, I use load boards every day here in the US, so I know, there is no way I can do my job without a load board. So I know, but you still can't get over that anxiety, especially now. We're turning our paywall on in January 1st. Okay. So
so now, now people have to pay for it, and the true test as to whether or not they value what you're providing them for what you have to charge them, right?
Yeah.
And be profitable at the same time, right?
Exactly, because I put so much money in there, you know, it'd be nice to get it back. Yeah.
Of course, everyone deserves to get their investment back and then be profitable, because that's how your business can continue to grow and be successful.
Yeah. So January 1st, so that would be the ultimate litmus test, you know, because it's a great solution, you know, but if people don't want to pay for it, you know, then it's just a hobby at that point.
Right.
But so actually, so from G Beta, so we Elizabeth, I'm gonna give Elizabeth credit this. So she had this idea that we should do a survey. Like so a couple of days ago, we sent a 2-question survey, just 2 questions, you know, kind of like so. Would you do you plan to subscribe to Apexloads when the free trial ends on December 31st?
Right.
So that was the first question, and the second question was like, what's your take on the fee? Like, do you think it's too cheap? Is it fair price, or is it too expensive? So, and that was kind of like to help alleviate some of the anxiety.
Sure.
You know, so far we have like 83 responses, and actually 94% say they will actually subscribe.
Okay.
So that's really great.
Right.
That's really great. But I remember whenever we sent the survey, and I was kind of like, oh man, I have got so many surveys and I've never responded. So I was like, you know, but fortunately we have like 80 responses, you know, which is a pretty good number. So if January, only 80 people pay, that's still validation, and we can kind of like continue to grow from there.
Make adjustment from there.
Yeah.
So amazing entrepreneurial journey from a original basic idea because you were trying to look for a startup, or a side hustle. You identified a problem, something that didn't exist, that you could take something that did exist somewhere else in the world and incorporate it, solve a problem, which is always the point of a good business, right? Is when you solve someone's problem that makes it valuable. You developed the early iterations, you created an MVP, then you understood you needed some more information, some more relationships, some capital, got into a few accelerators, working with the great people at I2E and Generator, etc. And now your MVP stage is coming to an actual launch, and you're going to see if people are going to pay for it. That is a fantastic entrepreneurial journey. And you had some frustrations, you had some hard times that you had to get over, but you also had some great success by simply just going and knocking on people's doors, right? And putting the hustle into the game, right?
Getting that like feedback, it has been amazing. But I'll honestly say kind of like what kept me going, because it is expensive. I think our burn rate has been like $7,000 a month. And me paying that is kind of like, and I also have needs, and I mean, I don't make that much money. So $7,000 a month, that's a lot of money. And putting this in a pre-revenue startup with the hope that you're going to eventually get that back is kind of like, oh man, I hope it works. I hope it works, kind of like, cause one interesting thing, culture, I grew up in Africa, and a lot of that is kind of like, go to school so you can get a good job.
Sure.
And I did, did engineering, worked for the greatest company in the world. But then you have to tell people that you're quitting engineering to go drive a truck.
That could be a hard conversation.
And it was, but a lot of it is kind of like, you gotta weigh the pros and cons,
right?
And that was my fascination with logistics, because, and that's kind of like what prompted me to do the switch. Because I say engineering is a great job, but logistics is a greater job. Three things I like about it. So let's say, that satisfaction you get when you finish a project,
right?
Like you started a project and you finish it. Well, I get that every other day, when I pick up a load and I drop it off, project complete, so you get that as satisfaction. And also the freedom, like let's say what I would make like 2 weeks as an entry-level engineer, in logistics, you can do that in 3 days. So I'm like, why would I work 2 weeks when I can do, and being in logistics is what has afforded me the time to also do Apexload, because like meetings, accelerators, I can be able to work my way through accelerators. I usually get like 2 or 3 Zoom meetings every other day, so gotta pull over and
but you could do it from the road.
I can do it from the road, but if I had an office job, you wouldn't be able to do
you would
that.
Be tied down.
So I love it. And like I say, I would encourage people, if you have an idea out there, it's only crazy until it's not. So,
that's right. So you try it out and you work through the again, the entrepreneurial journey that we described earlier. You get to a point where when people are ready to pay you for it, it's real.
It's awesome. It's awesome. And to me, how I look about it, if you look at like Africa right now, every time you hear Africa, it's always in the context that people are starving. People are starving in Africa. But UN did a study, UN Food and Agriculture Organization. They did a study and found that 50% of all agricultural produce in Africa goes to waste.
Oh.
Due to an inefficient supply chain infrastructure. Especially, agricultural goods are perishable.
So it's not just cost involved here, but we're really losing resources sitting on a dock or sitting somewhere and not being transported.
Right. So, and that's enough to feed 300 million people.
That's solving that problem would have amazing impact.
Yeah. So I was like, if you donate to Africa, which is great, but you should also consider investing in logistics. It's kind of like what does the Bible say? Teaching the man to fish.
Right.
That I think that would be great. So that way, that food is not going to waste. Because if you can feed 300 million people, that's almost the whole of U.S. population.
There's no way you couldn't see that, but as a positive, like that,
right.
and being able to create a profitable business at the same time. So that's a double win.
It's amazing. It's amazing, and kind of like my cousin, one of my cousins that I was telling you was in logistics. They ended up losing their truck because whenever you're talking about facilitating faster payment, so the industry standard for invoices is 30 days.
Right.
So if you drop off a load, but that usually takes 30 or 45 days. But in Africa, that could take as long as 120 days.
Oh, wow. So cash flow can become an issue.
Cash flow is a huge problem. And there's a lot of money. Like I said, these guys are paying 50% more than what we're getting paid here. So there is money. But if you don't get paid, so you can make a lot of money, but if you don't get that money when you need it, your truck is going to break down.
Yeah, or if you can't put fuel in it, or you can't buy parts, and then you're losing money for sitting still. Yeah.
Then you can't do the job. Then you can't afford your truck payment, and the bank takes your truck.
Right.
But if you have that help with cash flow, like, hey, you can stay in business. You can fix your truck. You can add an additional truck and all that.
Or you can always have a load as you return, right? So that you're getting more work.
So you already paid for the round trip, but it's even better if you got a return load. So it's amazing. It's amazing.
It is amazing. It's an amazing story. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you today. Also, the connection from Oklahoma to Africa. The fact that one of the things we do well here is trucking and logistics in Oklahoma because of agriculture, because of our background. Then having the military bases, which keeps great companies like Boeing around.
Yeah.
And so there are universities. You attended both universities. All of this is great synergy as to all of the things that we're doing in Oklahoma naturally, and the things that we're good at are applicable to other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And not only can we help you create a profitable business, you have the opportunity to solve logistics problems in a part of the world that needs it. We talked about how much waste is happening in agriculture. So there's so many benefits and so interesting conversation about how all of this started with your idea of maybe I want to do something on the side and try to figure out something to make a little bit extra money, or maybe quit that day job. But ultimately, the number one rule of business is finding a problem to solve, and you have absolutely found a problem to solve and a smart way of doing it. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. And kind of like how, I'm still an engineer by heart, like engineering is all about solving a problem,
right?
So I used to engineer aircrafts, now I'm engineering logistics.
There you go.
So it's kind of like, that's how it's kind of like made my parents feel better.
I'm still education is still being used.
Yeah, it's still quite useful. But, with Boeing, I can only solve a few problems.
Right.
But in logistics, we can literally solve problems on a whole continent.
This is amazing. Yeah. So happy that we have the conversation and learn the story on the podcast today. Looking forward to your pitch for OVF. You'll be one of our pitch presenters at our Power Luncheon, and looking forward to listening to you talk again, having that conversation. And I'm sure everyone in the room is also going to be maybe the next person wants to line up to maybe help you continue on this process.
Thank you guys, and thank you for this amazing opportunity.
Certainly.
And I'm really looking forward to the pitch. I'm glad it's in September. That way I have more good news to share.
Plenty of time. You're in iteration 11 right now. You'll be at like version 15 or 16 by the time that happens. But looking forward to having you at the OVF Luncheon. Very happy to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kyle. And hopefully I'll come back here one day.
Yeah, with a success story.
Yeah.
There you go. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you guys listening to the podcast again this month. We appreciate our guest, Charles Thuo, and looking forward to hearing him pitch at OVF pretty soon. And until then, you guys make sure that you check out the podcast, hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Make sure you have signed up for your membership for OVF so you don't miss out on pitch presentations and power lunch presentations each and every month. Appreciate you guys tuning in this time.